I'm a believer in Jesus Christ who struggles with addiction, anger, and codependency. My name's Ron. Denial is a refusal to admit or acknowledge something that is threatening or painful. I'm going to repeat that. Denial is a refusal to admit or acknowledge something that is threatening or painful. That definition explains why it took me so long to write my Celebrate Recovery testimony for the first time. But hey, as I've said many, many times, I may be slow, but I'm committed. Denial would want to keep my story inside, buried deep and insulated from the pain that comes from exposing one's weaknesses and past hurts. When I consider that fact, I find myself appreciating the wise words of a famous author who once said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you." Today, I continue to rid myself of the agony of bearing my untold story. From 1997 to 2005, I pastored a church in Eugene, Oregon called North Eugene Faith Center. One year, my Easter sermon was titled, "Miracles Still Happen." During this particular service, I had the opportunity to read to my entire church family a story I had written just a couple of weeks earlier titled, "The Miracle of a Changed Life." A few of my fellow church members knew some of my past life experiences prior to attending North Eugene Faith Center, but until the end of the story, most had no idea that what they were hearing was in fact an autobiography of my life. I'd like to begin my testimony today by reading that story to you. The Miracle of a Changed Life. This is the story of a little boy born in Brinkley, Arkansas, the son of a single divorced mother who married young to escape life on her parents' farm and the lifelong sexual abuse by her father. This little boy's mother spent the majority of her adult years searching the world of taverns and multiple alcohol relationships, hoping to find companionship and relief from the scars of her life of abuse, only to find her abuse compounded and inflicted upon the lives of her own children. At the time of this little boy's birth, his mother was a welfare recipient, raising 3 daughters, all under 6 years of age. This little boy would never remember meeting the second oldest of his 3 sisters, as she died of an incurable disease at the age of 5. In the years to come, his mother had 4 more children, 3 daughters and a son who was stillborn. At the young age of 6, this little boy was told by his mother that he and his sisters all had a different father. She went on to tell this little boy about how, when he was just an infant, she took him to his father's place of employment, but his father did not want to see him. Too young to comprehend the gravity of those words or the impact they would have throughout his life, he just shrugged it off and ran outside to play. This little boy grew up without ever knowing his biological father, living in a welfare home where moving was so frequent that he would live in 15 different homes by the age of 18 and would attend a different school each year until his high school years. At the beginning of his 4th grade, his mother married his first stepfather, initiating a series of relocations during that 1-year period that resulted in this little boy attending 4 different schools within 3 different states before finishing the 4th grade in the state of Oregon. Throughout his entire childhood and adolescent years, this little boy's brain was conditioned to be hypervigilant with a chronic low-level state of anxiety, constantly on the alert to the insecurity of his surroundings. His internal radar of insecurity was especially active late at night when his mother would bring home drunken men she met while out doing what she called honky-tonkin'. There were stepfathers who, while in an alcoholic rage, would physically abuse his mother. On one occasion, at the age of 10, with a butcher knife in his hand, this little boy would protect his mother from being beaten by screaming threats to stab his drunken stepfather if he didn't stop punching her. 1 year later, his mother would credit her now 11-year-old son for literally saving her life from the hands of the same stepfather who attempted to kill his mother while in one of his drunken rages. By the age of 16, this little boy, prematured beyond his teenage years, would have to work hard to calm the fears of his now schizophrenic mother during her frequent episodes of paranoid hallucinations when she would often act out in ways that would jeopardize the safety of his younger siblings. By this time in this little boy's life, he had learned since the age of 12 to seek relief from the pain of his home life through taking whatever mind-altering substances he could get his hands on, beginning with sniffing model airplane glue stolen from the neighborhood market to various illicit drugs and substances, of which marijuana and alcohol would prove to be his primary drugs of choice. Coming from a poor family with no money, he supported his own drug use by selling drugs to his peers, something he would do beginning in the 7th grade and continuing into his senior year of high school. At 17, halfway through his senior year of high school, this little boy, now a young man, would be blessed to have a friend who had recently given his own life to Jesus Christ, stopped by this young man's house and shared how Jesus had filled the void in his own heart and knew that Jesus could do the same for him. Unbeknownst to his friend, this young man had decided just 3 days earlier to quit using drugs. Also unbeknownst to his friend, this young man was at a crossroad in his life and was indeed feeling an emptiness in his own life. This young man would sit and hang on every word his friend was telling him about this new life he was experiencing. The following weekend, this young man would accept his friend's invitation to go to church, and at the pastor's invitation would make the decision to give his life to God by receiving his son, Jesus Christ, into his heart, and thereby allowing Jesus to initiate the miracle of a changed life. In the years following high school, many of his closest friends from his teenage years would end up in prison and or struggling with drug and alcohol addiction, broken relationships, and some, due to their course of life, even suffering permanent physical and psychological damage. However, this little boy, now a young man, having made the decision to allow Jesus to change his life, successfully completed high school, and he went on to receive an honorable discharge after serving 8 years of military service. After his military service, he returned home to complete a Bachelor of Arts degree in pastoral ministry with a dual minor in counseling and New Testament Greek. He graduated with high honors and was awarded most likely to become a pastor by the college faculty. Today, he has his own family, a lovely wife, and 4 precious daughters, and he currently serves as the senior pastor of a wonderful church body known within his community as the North Eugene Faith Center. And the story ends by saying, miracles still happen. At that point, again, as I said earlier, most people didn't realize that was my story. And when I said at the end, he now serves the pastor of North Eugene Faith Center, they went, that's you. And it wasn't a dry eye in the place. But here I want to say, now, with the music playing and the sounds of birds chirping, this is when we'd all like to see in big letters, and they lived happily ever after. Instead, hear the film crumpling and the music coming to a stop. On that day, many years ago, I shared a version of my story I would call the PG-13 version. The R version, however, would have to include being sexually molested between the ages of 6 and 7 by my oldest sister, who was 5 years older than me. By that point in her life, she had already been sexually molested by our mother's father, her own father, and undoubtedly by other men in my mother's life. I would also have to include my being sexually molested at the age of 9 and 13, both times by a trusted male in my life who was twice my age. In both instances, I was able to get myself out of the situation before it progressed significantly. However, not before a seed of shame had been deeply planted in my heart and soul that would affect my self-esteem and erode my ability to trust others for years to come. It wouldn't be until my early 50s, 4 decades later, that I was able to share this family secret and expose my shame within the security of one of our CR small groups. It's still not easy for me to share this detail of my life, but I'm finding that the more I do, the less power it has over me. A wise social worker once said, shame is something we all have, and the less we talk about it, the more we have it. I have also appreciated the words I heard during a men's retreat years ago. What lives in the dark, I always think that one's worth repeating. What lives in the dark dies in the light. Through the help of my CR family, I'm putting to death the power of shame in my life and thereby recovering who God originally intended me to be. I believe my codependency and my need to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol as an adolescent and as an adult was shaped by more than the sexual abuse and the regular occurrence of being left home alone with my young sisters while my mom went to taverns and bars, and by more than having to cope with going to high school while living in a home with a mother manifesting paranoid schizophrenic behavior that would result in her being hospitalized and losing custody of my 2 youngest sisters, then 3 and 4 years of age. More than all of that, I believe that the very depth of my being, the very foundation of my heart and core of my mind have been conditioned and wired to dysfunction from the years of psychological and emotional trauma I'd suffered from the impact of domestic violence I experienced from the time of my earliest memories and until leaving home at the age of 18. The countless nights of being awakened to the sounds of my mother's screams or the drunken rage of a violent stepfather, or even more torturous, the nightly experience of living or lying in bed and hearing the verbal fighting and cussing, fearing and anticipating the escalation of violence that would undoubtedly ensue, which would trigger my instinctive reflexes to bolt out of bed and race to my mother's rescue. On one such evening at the age of 16, I can remember bolting out of bed, running as fast as I could across the house to my mother's bedroom, and happened to physically kick in the locked door to intervene. Only this time, to find my mother with a can opener in her hand, the kind with the rectangular tips for opening cans of milk, and my now second stepfather bleeding from the gouge marks on his torso and both arms, as my mother was screaming accusations of his unfaithfulness of both a heterosexual and a homosexual nature. It was at that time I witnessed the transformation of my mother from becoming a victim of abuse to becoming the abuser. Talk about confusing as much as it was frightening. I wasn't sure from this point forward who I'd be rushing in to protect from whom. I graduated high school in 1980, and at the end of my first tour in the Navy in 1985, I married a girl I had known since my senior year of high school, a co-worker at Wendy's, who I had witnessed to shortly after I committed my life to Christ. We had had a genuine brother-sister relationship in the Lord, and we were just good friends for 3 to 4 years prior to falling in love. Believe it or not, her family of origin was pretty much just as dysfunctional as mine, but with its own twist on how its dysfunction was manifested. Looking back, I'm convinced that rather than being truly in love with each other, I believe we were both actually more in love with the idea of constructing a family neither of us ever had growing up. I was just turning 23. She was barely 22 when we committed our vows to being a husband and wife that would go on to raise 4 beautiful daughters within the dynamics of what would be a relationship plagued with conflict, codependency, insecurity, woundedness, resentment, and eventually a contempt that would breed indifference and resignation. One evening, during what would turn out to be the last year of our 22-year marriage, I was telling my wife and our teenage daughters how I heard on the radio that researchers had discovered that the judgment seat of the brain is not fully developed until about 25 years of age. My 17-year-old asked somewhat tongue-in-cheek, "Now, how old were you and Mom when you got married?" After telling her we were 22 and 23, she replied, "Well, that explains it." My wife at the time did not find that funny. To summarize our marriage, I spent the first 12 years hoping our marriage would get better, 12 years being how long it took to get my wife to finally go see a counselor with me. I spent the next 7 years working hard at making our marriage better, working with a total of 3 different counselors over a total of 4 years. And I spent the last 3 years giving up that my marriage would ever get better. It was then I began resigning myself emotionally to living out my days, numbing myself to the emotional abuse my wife was inflicting upon me and our daughters. Looking back, I can see how too much of my attention had been focused on getting my wife fixed. I realize now I could have benefited much more from the years of counseling had I focused more on fixing my life instead of fixing my wife. After serving 4 years as a staff pastor and 8 years as a senior pastor in Oregon, I had come to the point of what I could only describe as being burnout. After seeking the Lord's guidance with much counsel, I resigned my position as a senior pastor of North Eugene Faith Center and moved to Fresno to take a break. By serving as an associate pastor and working with the senior pastor friend who had recently started a new church plant. Having been involved in recovery these past years, I know now that my being burnt out had more to do with my codependent relationship with my wife than the ministry itself. After 1 year in this new pastoral position and with nothing changing at home or in me, I was becoming more and more critical and resentful toward people in the church. I had come to the point I knew it would be in everyone's best interest that I take an extended sabbatical. I remember saying to myself, I need to resign before I hurt somebody. At that point, 24 years of only having a couple of glasses of champagne a year, I began rationalizing my use of alcohol on a much more frequent basis. After all, since I hung up my pastoral license, I no longer needed to worry about being a model for others. My emotional pain was so great, my denial was so thick, I couldn't conceive or just didn't care enough about the fact that I was no longer worrying about being a model to those that mattered most, my own family. I started drinking a couple of beers in a parking lot down the street from our house before going home, but pretty soon I was bringing home half cases of beer and filling the bottom shelf of our refrigerator. While my 12-year-old daughter stood there eyes wide open in shock, I recall trying to rationalize my behavior by telling her not to be concerned about there being too many beers in the fridge, just be concerned if they start disappearing too quickly. And disappearing quickly, they did. I had given myself permission to start numbing my pain with alcohol and refused to admit or acknowledge what I was really trying to do was numb the pain of a life plagued with unresolved shame, hurt, and codependent tendencies. Having served 4 years as a certified drug and alcohol counselor during my second tour in the Navy, I knew I was drinking abusively and had even on occasions considered how I would have evaluated myself and to what level of treatment I would have referred myself to. By my third year of drinking, I was living the life of a full-blown functioning alcoholic, working a successful job during the day and then going home where I would drink 4 to 7 beers a night. This would continue for another year until I came to the point I knew I needed to take steps to stop this destructive path I was careening down. In the midst of my codependency issues, coupled with a chronic sense of hopelessness, I came to the place in my marriage when I said, enough. In September 2007, I told my wife that between her emotional violence and my emotional neglect, our daughters have been experiencing emotional abuse all their lives, and it needed to stop. I also informed her that I was no longer willing to remain in a relationship where I and my daughters were having to be constantly on guard emotionally, as our lives followed an unending cycle of domestic violence. Only the violence wasn't physical, it was emotional. Of course, this was the start of going through the painful process of a divorce, a process I would never wish on anyone, and encourage anyone considering divorce to do all you can with God's help to avoid it. Like so many others here, I too know why God says he hates divorce. It was within the year to follow, after going through the divorce care program, I began attending CR and started my recovery process. I started out by switching back and forth from the chemical dependency group and the codependency group, and for the past several years, I've ended up spending the majority of my time in the anger group, now chemical group. As of January 2025, as of December 9th coming up here, I will be celebrating 16 years alcohol-free. And in January, I'll be celebrating 17 years when I walk through those doors. Now, time does not allow me to list all the helpful truths I have learned since being in recovery, but if I were to list a few, it would include: 1, we're only as sick as our... Number 2, dysfunction is the gift that keeps on giving. 3, a victim mentality does not come from being victimized. A victim mentality comes from not taking responsibility for my recovery. 4, forgiveness and unforgiveness affects me more than the other person. 5, my conduct is never to be based upon the response of another, but upon my responsibility to please the Lord. 6, anger is a secondary emotion. The primary emotions typically being hurt, fear, and or frustration. As those in my anger group will attest, being angry is a lot easier than being hurt. Number 7, a good definition of recovery. Recovery is the process of recovering the person God originally intended me to be. And last, God helps those who help themselves. While that is the most commonly known Bible verse that's actually not in the Bible, the truth of the matter is, God helps those who cannot help themselves, but will admit that they are powerless over their addictions and compulsive behaviors and that their lives have become unmanageable. God helps those who have come to believe that a power greater than themselves can restore them to sanity, and God helps those who will turn their will and their lives over to his care. Sadly, in August 2020, I lost my 27-year-old daughter, Emily Rose, to complications of her alcohol addiction. Her passing did not create my faith nor my recovery, but it has definitely revealed my faith and my recovery. I'm confident that I would not have managed my relationship with her in a healthy manner while she was living in her addiction, nor would I have processed her passing without relapsing myself if it wasn't for the tools I have gained from being in recovery, the support I've received through this CR program, and my personal relationship with Jesus Christ. In addition to CR, a major part of my personal support system has been a brother in the Lord I've been meeting with on a weekly basis ever since I first moved to Fresno over 20 years ago. Since I've been attending CR, he has commented as to how he has seen a significant growth in my life and how he has witnessed the letting go of the hold that shame has had on my life and sees me walking in a freedom that is enabling me to be the man God has created and designed me to be. Sounds like a good description of recovery to me. Since the very first few weeks of attending CR, my support system has included a sponsor who has partnered with me in my recovery process. My sponsor has been a tremendous blessing to me, even when he holds my feet to the fire and doesn't allow me to get away with anything. A trait I know is motivated by his love for me and his commitment to being an intricate part of my recovery program. For the past several years, he clearly communicated his expectations that I call him 3 days a week, and when I didn't, he didn't hesitate to let me know about it. I know it's because of the strength he has developed from working on his own recovery program that he is able to deal with people like me. I'll never forget what he said to me early on in our relationship. He said, "Ron, the problem with you pastors is that you have a lot of head knowledge, but you struggle when it comes to applying it." To my sponsor, I say thank you for being the man of God you are and for helping me become the man of God I want to be. Since starting my recovery program here at CR, I've also been blessed to marry a beautiful woman of God who has been walking alongside me throughout the recovery process in both our lives. When it comes to being a person with whom there is no guile, that is, no deceit or duplicity, I honestly cannot think of anyone I know more than my wife who fits that description. Of course, we have our struggles, but we have both continued to grow in combating our codependency issues and responding to life and to each other in a more mature and Christ-like manner. Over the past 6 years, we have experienced some significant breakthroughs in our lives as a couple and individually. One of my greatest individual breakthroughs came as I spent a whole year of 2019 working with the VA psychologist who was instrumental in helping me work through my PTSD issues stemming from not my 8 years of military service, but from my 18 years of domestic violence I witnessed growing up. And regarding our breakthrough as a couple, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our therapist, Alice Witt, who is credited with so much of the progress we have made as a couple and as a blended family over these past several years. Today, I can honestly say I am happily married and happily married to a woman I truly love and that I'm in love with. I sincerely believe that from the beginning, God brought us together to be his grace for one another. And this upcoming October, this just past October, October 3rd, we celebrated 16 years of marriage. To my brothers in recovery, I would like to say, stay strong and courageous. You are loved, you're not alone, and you do have what it takes to be the man God created you to be. To my sisters in recovery, I'd like to say, your Heavenly Father looks at you and sees how beautiful you really are, and he loves you with the greatest love you will ever know. And he's restoring you to be the woman he has designed you to be. To the newcomer, I'd like to encourage you with the story of a man named Naaman in the Old Testament who God healed from an incurable disease. Naaman wanted God to heal him so he could experience a recovery of his physical health. In 2 Kings chapter 5, God's prophet told Naaman to go wash himself 7 times in the Jordan River. Naaman definitely wanted to be healed, and he definitely wanted to experience the miracle of a physical recovery, but he didn't like or agree with the way God was choosing to make it happen. The scriptures literally tell us that Naaman wanted God's servant to come out and wave his hand over him, and poof, he would be healed. Instead, God asked Naaman to do something that was simple and seemingly pointless to Naaman. Go wash himself 7 times in the Jordan River. And when Naaman humbled himself, obeyed God's instructions, and did the simple task he was told to do, then God did the miraculous. Question: do you want to experience the miracle of a changed life? The miracle of recovery? Then I encourage you to trust God, keep coming back, work the steps, and little by little, one day at a time, you will become stronger, wiser, and healthier. You will find that peace you're looking for, and I guarantee you, as you do the simple, God will do the miraculous in your life. Matthew 6:33 says, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and what? And all these things will be added to you. In recovery, we say it this way: one day at a time. The longer I am in recovery, the more I realize how true these words are, and if I keep doing what I'm supposed to be doing today, God will take care of my tomorrows, which includes my sobriety and my sanity. So on that note, I'll keep on coming back, seeking first his kingdom and his righteousness, and thanking God for being able to do all of this with my wonderful forever family here at CR. Thank you for letting me share.